Welcome to the Undiscovered Gems podcast, hosted by NBA legend and business powerhouse Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds.
Good day, and welcome to another show of Undiscovered Gems. I am your host. My name is Charles D. Smith. I'm a former NBA player, and today we have Allan Gold. Allan is our man of the year. Allan has spent 50 years as a school child psychologist. 50 years. Yes, I said 50 years. You don't get people that spend that much time in their career too much anymore. And Allan believes that the children today need more help than ever before. And we're going to unpack that statement. Allan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So Allan, tell us, how did you get into being a school child psychologist? How did it happen?
Well, it's one of the most ironic experiences of my life. My father was a high school math teacher. I was always interested in math. I got my bachelor's degree in math from the University of California in 1967. I started a PhD program in statistics there. I was going to be a statistics professor. And it turned out that I was in the last cohort of graduate students that had 1 year of deferment from being drafted into the military because it was right in the middle of the Vietnam War. So in 1968, I had to make a big decision. Do I go to Canada? Do I go to jail? Of course, I was participating in protests, and I was very anti-war. Do I get drafted and possibly killed? Or do I join the Army Reserve? So on April Fool's Day of 1969, I joined a hospital unit in San Francisco, went to basic training the next year, and had to make a choice of what to be trained in. So I was trained, I had a choice between nurse or psychology social work specialist. Well, I had no idea the military even had that. So I chose that, liked the training. Then I went after my training, I went to work for Blue Shield Health Insurance, where I had worked for summers during my college years, and I was going to be an actuary who makes up the premiums for insurance.
Sure.
And when you're in the Army Reserve, you have to go to summer camp for 2 weeks for 5 or 6 years. And the following year in 1971, I was coming back from summer camp speaking to a relatively new guy in my company, and he told me he was in a counseling and school psychology program at Stanford University. I'd never even heard of school psychology before, but it appealed to me because I always wanted to be an educator. So I took a class that fall in clinical psychology. By that time, I was 25 and thought, it might be too hard to get into a graduate program in clinical psych. So in 72, I went back to Berkeley as an undergraduate. I hadn't even had a psych course. Took a year of psychology. That fall, I had to apply to school psychology. I was a good test taker, and I got in. And I started my program in 1973, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I loved the training. I loved everything, the work with kids. And so I ended up in that profession. But it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the Army.
Wow. You know, people get into careers, and everybody has a story, and an incredible story, because you own it. It's your journey. It's your life path. And although everybody's different, the same thing is, you go through changes, you go through some personal trials, but you end up coming to a place, for most, you come to a place where it's not like it's work. It's you find your passion, you find something that you really want to do, and it's almost like that's your purpose. So let's talk about how that shapes you, because working with children, you have to have a good sense of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
The person working with children has, you go through some things. So talk to us about some of the trials you've had that kind of shapes you. One of the things is, I want to hear about your trial and how you dealt with polio, because you got cured from it. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when I was 1 year older than 8. I just had my 8th birthday in 1954. You can figure out how old I am. And my parents and I were all set to go to Yosemite for a little vacation. And I woke up in the morning with a stiff neck. And in those days, doctors came to your house, came to my house, our apartment, and sent me to the hospital right away. Now, I didn't know what I had, but they tested me. I was paralyzed for a little while. It was 1 year before the Salk vaccine was invented.
Mm.
So I was at the hospital for about 18 days. And I remember asking a nurse maybe 2 weeks in, and I said, "What's the matter with me?" And she said, "Well, you have polio." And I said, "No, I don't. I have a stiff neck." So fortunately, I was not in an iron lung. I wasn't permanently paralyzed. I went home. I missed school. I was just about starting 4th grade because I had skipped a grade. And but I had to miss about 4 months. I was lying in bed. My father picked me up and carried me to the dining room table twice a day and did exercises with me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was. Unfortunately, I recovered. I supposedly had a more mild version, and when I look back at that, I was just about the right age to get it, or I wasn't too old. If I had been 10
Mm.
years old or older, I probably would have panicked because one of my mother's sister's dear friend's daughter died at 14, a month before I got it. So I can imagine my parents. I know they were freaking out because I was their only child. They were older,
Mm.
born, they couldn't have any more. So for them, it was really awful. But the only other time I got worried about it was back in the 80s when they talked about post polio syndrome, and I was worried that I might have some symptoms of that. But would I? I survived all of that too.
Mm. So, as a child going through that, what can you relate that to in being a child psychologist and dealing with children having all sorts of issues? Is anything there relatable?
Yes, absolutely. Because I would deal with kids who had to deal with all kinds of trauma, whether
Yeah,
it was the death of a grandparent or even a parent, an illness. I'm not talking about academic kind of thing, divorce
sure,
for
sure.
sure. So the different kinds of things that I went through in my life really helped build that empathy so that I could understand what kids would go through. The other major
Sure.
one is that I've been HIV positive for probably 43 years and I didn't die of
Mm.
AIDS. Um, I've had a terrible car accident 5 years ago last month. Um, if somebody had been a passenger in my car, they would have been killed. So I feel like I've dealt with, in the metaphor, I've dodged a bunch of bullets. I've had prostate
Right.
cancer too 9 years ago. So all of those really helped me
Yeah.
understand what kids were going through and sometimes help put their troubles in perspective and to help them understand, because often kids would um, exaggerate, not to them, and I don't want to criticize them for that, but they would exaggerate how awful something is. And the older you are, the more you have to deal with in life. So you have a sense that, yes, this is a terrible thing to go through, but I can survive. So I used to teach kids about what I call a history bank, where you remember episodes that are very challenging that you go through, um, and you do survive. Maybe you thrive. Maybe you just survive it, whether it's a parent divorce or an illness or something like that, a death in the family, a death of a pet. just to be able to give them the strength to say, yeah, this is really awful, but I can talk about it and I will get through it. To build resilience in kids. That's so important.
Right. And as I said earlier, you're in a major transition. You've worked in a career for 50 years. You've retired, and it's like, what's next? If you've done this for you've done this for more than your entire life.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's next? What do you do? How do you occupy your time? What is your transition? And one of the things is, let's talk about the fact that you've gone through a process of your early years, your work years, and now after you retired, that you've been gay. How's that maturation process worked for you, going throughout it? And that's a part of where you are today also. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, being a gay school psychologist, at first I hid that fact from most people because I started working in 1976, and in 1978 there was a California proposition, the Briggs Initiative, that was fortunately voted down, but that would have prevented gay and lesbian people from working in schools. And the election was like about 2 weeks after I got my PhD, so I didn't know where that was going. So I hid that. But over time, not too much longer, maybe in the 80s or 90s, I would let faculty know that that was my sexual orientation. I didn't want to talk about it with kids or parents because I didn't want them to focus on me. I was focusing on whatever their issues were. But in the beginning of this century, things became a lot better. And I was open with parents. I even was open with kids when it was appropriate. About 6 years ago, I started a group at my middle school, Gender Sexuality Alliance group, once a week at lunch, to provide a safe space for kids who were questioning their sexual identity, their sexual orientation, or who had friends that were allies to those kids. And it was really helpful. And, I told my own history. And so that was one way. And, teachers were very accepting, and there were gay teachers in a school district. And so it was a safe place to work. And, after after a few years, I felt like I was better at what I was doing. Although I've often said it took me 25 years to really feel like I knew what I was doing all the time. And the wonderful aspect of the job is that it's always challenging. There's always something new to learn about. But the transition you asked me about, it's been a multiple transition. I was going to work till I was 80 years old. But my husband of 29 years passed away 8 months ago. He had Parkinson's disease, and so he was declining. And in 2023, I said, I cannot work and take care of him as well. He was a veteran and was exposed to Agent Orange in Korea during the Vietnam War, but didn't show any symptoms for 35 years after that. But so that was, I was spending a lot of time doing that. But it's a very good question. The transition from when one is working in a helping profession all of one's life, it's really hard to give that up. So currently, I'm in contact with some of my former students, and I do free consultation or counseling with them. I just this week I was counseling the daughter of another one of my former students. She's 48 now. So I try to, and through my synagogue, let's see, it's almost 17 years ago, I started a group for gay dads. They had adopted all adopted kids that were very, very challenging. And they were ages 2 to 7 then. Now they're 19 to almost 24. And but we still meet once a month, and I can be a facilitator and give them advice or let them talk about the issues that they're dealing with. And about
Mhm.
4 years ago, I started another parent group, which I do monthly through my synagogue. So I want to keep the skills that I have useful for
Sure.
people.
Great. Now that we kind of unpacked, and I'm going to talk a little bit more later about your transition, I want to weave in the children. You made a statement that children need more help today than ever before. What's the context behind that statement?
Well, I think a lot of it is social media,
I agree.
where I would spend much more time in the last 10 or 15 years deconstructing issues between kids in person. So I've learned as I get older and more experience that communication is incredibly important for everybody, for adults to kids, for kids to each other. So, for example, if two kids came to me and one said, "She's being really mean to me," and I would say, "Okay, well, let's talk about that. What does mean?" And I would try to get them to really talk about what was bothering them and to give each other respectful feedback.
Hmm.
And I would tell kids, nobody's going to change unless you get feedback about what you're doing. If you're doing something that's annoying, um, you need to be informed by the other person so that you won't do that. And so I would have these fairly long conversations where kids may be responding to just something that somebody texted to them as opposed to speaking in person, because they would say things that they wouldn't necessarily say in person. And just the how kids are always on, well, so are adults these days too,
Hmm.
always on their phones, and they really don't talk. And so I realize that communication is absolutely important, and people need help with that because all of us may interpret a word differently than somebody else might, and things really need explaining. The other thing that I feel has happened is that kids are meaner to each other, and
Hmm.
so are adults. Not that there always hasn't been bullying.
Hmm.
I was a very small kid, unlike you, and so kids called me shrimp and that kind of stuff. So and it hurt my feelings, but I didn't know what to do about it.
Right.
I'm not that small anymore, but what I've seen is that in the last 8 years, there's been an escalation in how kids are mean to each other. And without being
Hmm.
specific, you probably know what I'm talking about. If
Right.
they're role models, whether they're political or athletic or um, actors and actresses, and there's just so much negativity in the world and
Yep.
between people, and to try to get kids to realize that's not the way to communicate with each other. And it's a huge job. It's a huge job.
Right.
And I loved trying to, you know, um, get that communication in a way that was respectful, where, you kids weren't saying, "Oh, you're so mean, you're horrible." Let's talk about that, and let's figure out how to um, what you'd like the other person to do or not do that would make your relationship better.
I'm listening to you, Alan, and you've come at a very critical time where you've dealt with children pre and during the social media frenzy. You've
Hmm.
seen the changes in direct communication versus misdirected communication via text or some other platform that they'll. I mean, I have four sons in the age range of 23 to 32. So I've seen them go through this thing, and it is a. So I'm in agreement with you when you say kids need help more now than ever before. Focused around social media,
Yeah.
it's damaging. Talk.
Another another area that I've seen an increase in this century, I sort of blame it on 9/11, though I'm not quite sure. Is an
Hmm.
increase in stress and anxiety and pressure.
Yes.
Now, I worked in a high socioeconomic area, so there is always the pressure, but I didn't note it as much in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It seemed like there's a lot of fear that generated in adults. And, is my kid going to make it? Is he going to get a good job? Is he going to have enough money? I mean, I would have kids even as young as sixth grade worried about what college they're getting into. And,
Right.
you want elementary school and middle school and high school to be fun for kids.
Right.
But there was a lot of I remember clearly a seventh grade girl said to me once, "My parents only love me if I get straight A's." Now, I knew that probably wasn't true, but
Right.
that was her impression. So um, that was another. So between the social communication, the bullying and meanness, and the stress and anxiety that kids feel, those are three big areas that was a challenge.
Yeah. So, after COVID, when kids were at home, homeschooling, I was on the board of St. Francis College in New York. When kids started going back into the classroom, there were not enough counselors available for all the children that needed to talk to someone and needed help from anxiety and stress. Just those two, anxiety and stress, because you mentioned it. Um, can you talk a little bit about the that transition you've seen with kids pre and post, and why the anxiety and the stress is so much higher today?
Yeah. Well, particularly depending on the age of kids. So if kids were like
Hmm.
kindergarten, first, second, third grade during the 3 or 4 COVID years, they really didn't learn a lot of the social skills that they normally would, like during recesses at school.
Right, right,
So it's not that they didn't, but there was a delay. So, and then the pressure for kids, asking a first grader to get their education, staring at a computer, that's like asking a college kid, And so that was very, very difficult. Now, fortunately, in my school district, the kids were only was from March of 2020 through about October of 2020, and then they began to come back. They had plastic um, guards between all
sure.
of the students. So there, but anytime a kid needed to talk, I was there, and even during when everything was on Zoom, then I could meet with a child on Zoom, and actually therapists still do that, but you're absolutely right. In general, I would say there are not enough counselors and psychologists in schools to handle everything
Yeah.
that needs to be handled. It's really a profession that needs to be encouraged. Young people need to be encouraged with that. And one thing that I did, I went to Berkeley, as I said, and in my parents and my name about 10 years ago now, I started a fellowship for graduate students in school psychology to
Right.
help support them. And I've
Hmm.
been contact with some of them too, to guide them. There's a lot of information that graduate students need to know to be successful at this job.
Sure.
The main one is not to be hard on oneself, So there's plenty to teach.
Yeah, absolutely. And Allan, I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to lean on your experience and try to come up with the best answer you can. What does it look like for the kids in the future that are now adults that went through these phases? How is it impacting them? How do you see them? And I'm not going to say positive or negative. I just want to ask a broad question. You answer it any way you want to.
It's an excellent question. I think the whole technology and social media. Now, somebody could be listening and say, "Oh, he's just an old guy," but I think, as I said earlier, communication is so important, and how we do that. And I think young people these days are so used to communicating on, by texting and emailing. That they don't really have the experience of how do I resolve an issue. One of my great gifts, I have a former student, she's 21 now, and I've known her since kindergarten. She was an old soul. When I saw her at 4.5, I said, she's not 4.5, she's 45. Anyway, but she reconnected with me a couple of years ago because she had concerns about her not doing the career that she wanted because she wasn't helping people. So we talked about all that, but she's now like a daughter to me, actually.
Oh, nice.
Talked all about relationships, and she has a boyfriend, and how do you communicate these issues that come up? And I think for people to build relationships, whether it's with a friend, with a partner, with a child, it's so important to understand really how to take the time. And people are, young people are so glued to their laptops and their iPads and their phones that they don't have the experience of how to really communicate. And so that, I would say, and then you have people who are addicted to that stuff too, which is not just kids either. So I think that's something that people have to realize and try to overcome.
Right. No, you're right. The art of human engagement is almost a lost art with children. I really had to talk to my sons about, they would break up with friends, male or female, via text.
Yeah.
Okay, we're done. And how can you do that? It's not only cold, but you're lacking a skill set there where you don't want to engage in conflict and you just want to end it with a simple thumb clicks. And I had to get them to learn to communicate and have direct dialogue. They're great today, but
good.
Yeah, so you've seen it. You've seen it all. You've seen it.
And nobody's going to change if they don't, as I said earlier, if they don't have that feedback. What did I do to help, to be part, not help, but to be part of this breakup?
Sure.
Because if you don't learn, if people don't want to learn and reflect, that's one thing about that young woman I was talking about. She's very, very internally reflective. And but people now, and what their role model is, just blame everybody else, and that's a very sick role model.
Well, I'll tell you, Allan, just in the fact that you brought it up on the social media, you can't retire. It sounds like you still have some work to do just in that interest alone, because it is a big deal. There needs to be a lot of people out there because, we are falling behind. It'll be in the job field, it'll be with families, it'll be across the board with the lack of communication, empathy, and the emotional skills needed to live a healthy life. And I think it's going to impact every part of our society. And so you're one, like I said, you've seen it pre and during, and you see the effects today. You still have some work to do. Sorry.
Yep. No, you're right.
Yeah. So Allan, based on what would you like to tell the audience at this point? What do you want them to go away with?
Well, I'd like them to go away with recognizing the challenges of life these days, of being able to continue to learn. I mean, personal self-esteem is so important. I worked with kids on that all the time, because I think many people, probably the majority of people, go through life being hard on themselves. It doesn't mean that they can't be critical, but as a human being, we all make mistakes. And
Right.
how do we correct those? Whether it's a work mistake, a relationship mistake, a medical mistake. It's very important to be able to reflect and communicate and find out and recognize that we are capable of changing. Now, when you're older, it's harder, but I think that's one strong message that I give. We don't have to be hard on ourselves. We have to accept mistakes, but we also have to be willing to change.
Awesome. Allan Philip Gold, PhD Man of the Year. Thank you for dropping gems on undiscovered gems, because your knowledge in this field is exceptional. Thank you for coming on the show. Look to have you on again. And thank you for spending your time with me and the audience, Allan.
And thank you so much for your time and your wonderful questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Gems with our host, Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds. Brought to you by Pods Entertainment Group.